Welcome to this quiet space, designed to help your mind settle into rest. Tonight, we turn our thoughts toward the gentle, measured history of medieval watermills and rural grain storage. Far away from the noise of modern times, the ancient countryside moved to the rhythmic splashing of wooden wheels and the steady hum of grinding millstones. As you lie back and make yourself comfortable, allow the soft cadence of history to soothe your thoughts. There is nothing you need to accomplish tonight, and nowhere else you need to be. Simply breathe deeply, close your eyes, and listen as we wander along silent riverbanks and peaceful stone granaries of centuries long past. Long ago, along the tranquil riverbanks of ancient lands, early human communities sought simple ways to harness the steady movement of flowing water. Before complex machinery existed, small wooden wheels were dipped into shallow streams. The water pushed against flat wooden paddles, turning an axle with a rhythmic splash. This gentle rotation provided continuous movement without human effort. Villagers gathered along the banks, watching the slow wheel turn against the current. It was a humble beginning to an industrial legacy that would shape the landscape for generations. These early water wheels were remarkably quiet and simple in construction. Built primarily from local timber such as oak or elm, they relied on basic joinery held together with wooden pegs. Master carpenters selected seasoned wood that could withstand constant immersion in damp conditions without rotting quickly. As the wheel revolved, water dripped smoothly from the paddles back into the river below. The sound of trickling water mixed with the soft creaking of seasoned timber created a calming, repetitive atmosphere throughout the surrounding peaceful valley. Over time, knowledge of these early stream-driven mechanisms spread along trade routes across wide regions. Farmers observed how predictable water flow could replace tiring manual labor. Small irrigation channels were diverted from larger rivers to feed these wheels directly. The steady motion lifted small buckets of water, depositing them into elevated wooden troughs. This continuous flow nourished distant fields of grain without pause. The harmonious relationship between running water, crafted wood, and fertile earth laid the foundation for centuries of peaceful rural ingenuity. In warm, sunlit regions of antiquity, engineers developed the Noria, a specialized vertical wheel designed to lift water automatically. Fitted with clay pots or hollowed wooden containers around its outer rim, the Noria turned lazily as the river swept underneath. Each container dipped into the stream, filled with cool water, and rose slowly toward the sky. Upon reaching the top of the rotation, the vessel tilted gently, spilling its contents into an aqueduct channel. The continuous dipping and emptying created a soothing aquatic rhythm. The construction of a Noria required precise balance and careful craftsmanship. Local craftsmen fashioned the rim from bent branches, securing each joint with durable cordage and iron bands. Because these wheels often reached great heights, their movement was deliberate and unhurried. The weight of the filled pots created a natural cadence, slowing the wheel to a tranquil pace. Shadows lengthened across the water as the wheel rotated under the afternoon sun, carrying nourishment to hillside orchards and terraced gardens situated far above the river. Travelers along ancient trade roads often paused to rest near these tall wooden structures. The steady splash of falling water and the low groaning of the wooden axle provided a peaceful backdrop for weary wanderers. Villages grew up around the Norias, relying on their untiring operation day and night. Season after season, through gentle rains and warm summers, the wheels turned without complaint. They stood as timeless monuments to human patience and the endless power of natural watercourses moving steadily toward the distant sea. In the hills of southern Gaul, Roman engineers constructed one of the most magnificent industrial complexes of the ancient world. Known as the Barbagal Mill Complex, This remarkable sight featured 16 water wheels arranged in 2 parallel rows along a steep hillside. A monumental stone aqueduct carried water from nearby springs directly to the top of the incline. From there, the water cascaded down from one wheel to the next, turning 8 successive pairs of heavy millstones with extraordinary mechanical efficiency and elegance. The scale of the barbagal operation was unprecedented in ancient history. Daily, thousands of pounds of grain were processed into fine flour to feed nearby coastal cities. The sound of water cascading through stone flumes matched the low, resonant rumble of 32 massive stone discs grinding in unison. Despite the immense productivity of the complex, the surrounding landscape remained serene and orderly. Meticulously cut masonry channels directed the spent water safely back into natural streams, leaving no trace of disruption behind. Though the Roman Empire eventually dissolved, the architectural principles demonstrated at Barbagal endured through centuries of rural tradition. Medieval builders studied these ancient ruins, adapting the concepts of multi-tiered water flow and masonry channels for smaller village installations. The idea that water could be managed with structured elegance passed down through generations of builders. The quiet memory of Roman engineering lingered in European valleys, inspiring generations of millwrights who sought harmony between heavy stone and liquid power. Building a medieval mill began with selecting enduring materials from the surrounding countryside. Millwrights searched deep forests for dense heartwood oak, known for its ability to resist moisture and heavy strain. Massive logs were felled during the quiet winter months when the sap was low within the tree trunks. Meanwhile, local stonemasons quarried durable sandstone or granite blocks for the foundations. Setting timber posts into rock-solid stone footings ensured that the mill structure could withstand decades of continuous vibration and spring floods. The assembly of the timber framework was an exercise in precision woodworking. Craftsmen shaped massive main beams using broadaxes, cutting intricate mortise and tenon joints by hand. Heavy wooden pegs, fashioned from dried trunnels, were driven into fitted holes to lock the structure tightly without metal nails. This flexible joinery allowed the building to absorb the subtle movements caused by shifting water currents and seasonal expansion. The resulting timber frame stood firm, cradling the heavy mechanical components with quiet strength and resilience. As the mill took shape along the riverbank, its thick stone walls provided natural insulation and damp control. The interior remained cool during summer heat and protected from freezing winds during winter frosts. Smelling of fresh oak shavings, damp moss, and cut stone, the mill building felt like a natural extension of the landscape itself. Every beam and foundation stone was laid with quiet care, ensuring that the peaceful rhythm of grain milling would endure across many decades of rural life. A crucial step in constructing a watermill was creating the mill race, an artificial channel engineered to guide water toward the wheel. Millwrights carefully excavated a path parallel to the main river, ensuring a gradual and predictable incline. By diverting a fraction of the stream into this controlled channel, they created a calm stream with predictable depth and velocity. Moss-covered stone embankments lined the sides of the mill race, preventing erosion and keeping the flowing water clear of silt and fallen forest debris. The head race brought water from the main river toward the mill, while the tail race safely carried it back downstream. Between these two channels lay the heart of the waterworks, where the water's energy was transferred to the wheel. The smooth surface of the mill race reflected the surrounding trees and drifting clouds like a quiet mirror. Water lilies often grew along the tranquil margins, where the current was gentle. This carefully modified landscape balanced industrial utility with quiet, natural beauty. Maintaining the mill race was a peaceful, seasonal routine for the village miller. Each autumn, after leaves fell from the surrounding trees, the channel was cleared using long wooden rakes. Any accumulation of gravel or river mud was carefully removed to ensure smooth water flow for the upcoming winter. Watching the clear water glide down the immaculately maintained mill race offered a comforting sense of order. The steady current moved forward without haste, ready to turn the heavy wheel once again. To control the volume of water entering the mill, builders installed heavy wooden sluice gates along the channel. Raised and lowered using simple iron screws or wooden levers, these vertical barriers acted as precise valves for the stream. By adjusting the gate height, the miller could regulate the exact speed of the water wheel. A small turn of the iron handle could transform a rapid flow into a gentle trickle, ensuring that delicate millstones operated at a steady and safe rotational pace. When the day's work was finished, the sluice gate was lowered entirely, blocking the flow of water into the wheel pit. The sudden quiet was profound as the heavy timber wheel came to a peaceful halt. Water diverted by the closed gate spilled gently over a bypass weir, returning directly to the main river without driving machinery. This overflow created a soft, rhythmic waterfall sound that drifted across the nearby meadows during quiet evening hours. During periods of heavy spring rainfall, sluice gates protected the mill building from high water levels and debris. The miller could divert excess river volume away from the wooden wheel, preserving the delicate joinery from strain. This simple yet effective engineering gave human operators full control over the powerful natural forces of the river. The sluice gate stood as a quiet sentinel, maintaining perfect balance between the rushing stream outside and the serene work within. Among the oldest designs of water wheels was the Undershot wheel, positioned directly over a fast-flowing river. In this configuration, the river water flowed beneath the wheel, striking flat wooden blades mounted around the rim. The kinetic energy of the stream pushed the lower paddles forward, driving the central axle into continuous rotation. Undershot wheels were ideal for flat lowland rivers, where creating steep drops in water level was not practical for local builders. Though less efficient than elevated water systems, undershot wheels possessed a simple and charming rustic elegance. Constructed with straight radial spokes, they could be assembled quickly by local village carpenters using readily available timber. As the bottom blades dipped into the river, small white waves formed around the wood, creating a pleasant churn. The continuous motion of the stream ensured that the wheel maintained a steady, soothing rhythm throughout long working days along the riverbank. In many European villages, undershot wheels were mounted on floating barges anchored in the middle of wide rivers. Known as boat mills, these flexible structures rose and fell automatically with changing water levels. Floating quietly in the middle of wide currents, boat mills operated without needing permanent stone dams on the riverbanks. Their presence added to the peaceful scenery of medieval riverways, where trade barges and water-powered mills coexisted in serene harmony. In hilly regions with plentiful water drops, millwrights built overshot wheels, which captured the force of falling water. Water was conveyed along an elevated wooden flume directly over the top of the wheel structure. Instead of flat paddles, overshot wheels featured enclosed buckets crafted around the outer rim. Water poured into these buckets from above, using gravity to weigh down one side of the wheel and cause it to turn smoothly on its massive central axle. The efficiency of the overshot wheel was remarkably high, requiring far less water volume to generate significant rotational power. As each bucket filled at the top, it carried its heavy load downward in a graceful arc before emptying at the bottom of the stroke. The weight of the falling water created immense torque, turning heavy millstones with quiet, unstoppable momentum. The steady, regular dripping of water from ascending empty buckets added a gentle texture to the sounds of the wheelhouse. Overshot wheels often became iconic features of mountain valleys, nestled against rocky cliffs and dense pine forests. Tall, elegant, and towering over small mill houses, they stood as magnificent examples of medieval craftsmanship. Mist rose from the discharge point beneath the wheel, feeding lush ferns and emerald mosses growing along the foundation stones. The calm, powerful rotation of the Overshot wheel mirrored the steady, eternal rhythm of mountain streams flowing down toward the plains. As hydraulic engineering evolved during the High Middle Ages, millwrights introduced the breastshot water wheel as a balanced alternative. In this design, water entered the wheel near its middle height, hitting the curved buckets at chest level. A closely fitted curved stone masonry wall, known as the breastwork, wrapped tightly around the lower portion of the wheel. This structure prevented water from spilling out of the buckets prematurely, maximizing the energy captured from the stream. Breastshot wheels combine the benefits of both impulse from flowing water and weight from filled buckets. Because water struck the wheel at mid-height, the direction of rotation allowed the wheel to turn in the same direction as the outgoing tail race water. This reduced resistance and allowed for smooth, quiet rotation even when water levels in the lower channel fluctuated slightly. The clever geometry of the breastwork reflected a maturing understanding of physics among medieval builders. Operating with smooth regularity, the breastshot wheel became a favorite choice for large monastic and manor mills across Western Europe. Its moderate size and steady performance made it ideal for powering complex gear systems inside multi-story mill buildings. Watching the water enter the midpoint of the wheel and flow away through clean stone masonry offered a sense of satisfying order. It was a refined solution born from centuries of watching streams flow through green pastures. Inside the mill building, the horizontal motion of the main axle had to be transferred to turn vertical millstones. This required an ingenious assembly of wooden gears crafted with incredible precision. Attached directly to the main water wheel shaft was the pit wheel, a massive gear studded with wooden teeth. The pit wheel meshed at right angles with a smaller gear called the wallower, which was shaped like a cylindrical lantern made of tough hardwood rungs. The wooden gear teeth, or cogs, were individual pieces carved from dense hornbeam or beech wood. Each cog was meticulously fitted into slots around the rim of the pit wheel, allowing broken or worn teeth to be replaced without replacing the entire gear. As the teeth meshed together, they produced a low, rhythmic clicking sound that echoed gently through the timber frame. Generous applications of beeswax and animal tallow lubricated the wooden surfaces, ensuring smooth contact and minimal friction. This right-angle gear transmission changed the rotation from a slow, horizontal axis into a faster, vertical rotation. The wallower turned a central vertical drive shaft that rose through the mill floor into the grinding chamber above. The entire mechanism operated without high-speed modern friction, generating a heavy, reassuring hum. Standing inside the gear room, one could feel the quiet mechanical heart of the mill transferring power seamlessly from the distant river to the millstones above. At the center of every watermill was the great axle, a massive tree trunk stripped of bark and rounded to form a main shaft. Spanning from the external water wheel through the thick stone wall into the interior gear pit, this timber carried all the mechanical strain of the mill. Selected from ancient oak trees for its strength, the main shaft could measure up to 2 feet in diameter. It rested on heavy iron gudgeons fitted into bronze or stone-bearing blocks. To prevent the heavy timber axle from splitting under continuous torque, iron bands were forged by local blacksmiths and driven onto the ends. These glowing metal rings shrank tightly as they cooled, clamping the wood fibers into an unbreakable cylinder. The smooth rotation of this heavy oak trunk was a marvel of pre-industrial mechanics. Despite weighing several tons, a well-balanced axle turned smoothly, producing a deep, resonant vibration that grounded the entire building. The bearings supporting the main axle were greased daily with rendered lard or sheep fat, keeping friction and heat to a minimum. The pleasant aroma of warm wood and natural lubricants filled the quiet lower floor of the mill house. Watching the great wooden cylinder revolve slowly on its smooth bearings brought a profound sense of mechanical stability. It had turned yesterday, it was turning today, and it would continue turning for decades without haste. The true work of grinding grain took place between a pair of heavy, cylindrical millstones positioned on the upper floor. While local sandstone was commonly used for coarse animal feed, the finest wheat flour required special stones known as French Burr. Composed of small pieces of freshwater quartz embedded in hard chalcedony, these stones were imported from quarries near the Marne Valley in France. Their porous, yet extremely hard surface produced exceptional flour without contaminating the meal with stone dust. Because large monolithic blocks of high-quality quartz were rare, French Burr stones were built by assembling precision-cut segments like a round jigsaw puzzle. Stonemasons fitted these quartz pieces tightly together using plaster of Paris, forming a solid circular disc up to 6 feet in diameter. Heavy iron hoops were then heated and driven around the outer edge, binding the assembly together under immense pressure. The resulting millstone was a masterpiece of specialized craftsmanship and endurance. A complete set of millstones consisted of 2 discs, the stationary bedstone on the bottom and the rotating runner stone above. The runner stone was carefully balanced on a central spindle so that it spun just a fraction of a millimeter above the bedstone. This tiny gap ensured that grain was crushed gently rather than pulverized by direct stone contact. The cool, hard quartz surfaces were perfectly suited to turn golden wheat into soft, powdery flour. To keep millstones grinding efficiently, their flat grinding surfaces had to be periodically dressed by hand with sharp metal tools. Over weeks of continuous use, the quartz surfaces wore smooth, reducing their ability to shear wheat grains cleanly. A specialist known as a stone dresser used a double-ended hammer called a mill bill to cut a precise pattern of shallow grooves into the face of both stones. This process required a steady hand and immense patience. The pattern cut into the stone surface was an arrangement of straight master furrows radiating outward, flanked by smaller secondary grooves. The raised, flat areas between the grooves were called lands. As the top stone rotated, the crossing patterns of upper and lower furrows acted like thousands of tiny scissors, shearing the wheat berries cleanly. Furthermore, the furrows acted as air channels, cooling the stones and sweeping the ground flour outward toward the edge. Dressing a set of millstones was a quiet, meditative process taking several days to complete. The stone dresser worked in the soft light of the mill floor, tapping the hard quartz with rhythmic precision. Fine sparks occasionally flew as metal struck hard stone, leaving a clean, sharp pattern across the surface. Once completed, the stones were leveled carefully and reinstalled, ready to provide months of consistent, high-quality flour for the surrounding community. Suspended above the center of the millstones was the hopper, a large funnel-shaped wooden box made of polished pine or oak. Farmers brought their sacks of harvested wheat up to the top floor of the mill and emptied the dry grain into this upper reservoir. The sloping inner sides of the hopper allowed the wheat berries to slide smoothly downward under their own weight toward the small opening at the bottom, directly above the rotating spindle. The hopper served as a buffer, ensuring a continuous and even supply of grain fed into the grinding machinery below. Without a steady supply of grain, the top stone could come into contact with the lower stone, generating friction, heat, and potential fire hazards. The hopper was designed to hold several bushels at once, allowing the miller to manage other tasks around the mill house while the grain trickled steadily into the central eye of the stone. Dust from the dry wheat floated gently in the sunbeams that streamed through the upper windows of the mill loft. The golden color of the grain contrasted warmly with the dark, seasoned timber of the hopper structure. Looking into the full bin, one could appreciate the end product of a full summer's growth, ready to be transformed into nourishing flour. The quiet trickle of wheat into the hopper was a peaceful signal that the mill was hard at work. Between the bottom of the hopper and the central opening of the millstone lay a small wooden trough called the shoe. Suspended by leather straps, the shoe tilted slightly downward to guide grain into the spinning eye of the runner stone. Resting against the central vertical spindle was a notched iron rod known as the damsel. As the main spindle rotated, the notches of the damsel repeatedly tapped against the wooden shoe, causing it to vibrate rapidly. This continuous tapping motion was critical to the milling process. The vibration prevented the dry grain from clogging inside the narrow spout, ensuring that wheat berries slid down into the millstone at an absolute constant rate. If the speed of the water wheel increased, the damsel rotated faster, tapping the shoe more frequently and feeding more grain to match the increased speed of the stones. It was an ingenious, self-regulating mechanical feedback system. The repetitive chatter of the damsel tapping against the shoe was the signature sound of an operating medieval mill. Millers listened carefully to this rhythmic clatter. Any change in pitch or speed alerted them instantly to adjustments needed in water flow or stone clearance. To anyone resting inside the mill, the cheerful chatter of the damsel was a soothing sound, echoing the harmonious activity of wood, iron, stone, and water working together. As grain passed through the eye of the top stone, it entered the narrow space between the two rotating quartz discs. The spiral furrows channeled the wheat berries outward toward the perimeter, gradually shearing and crushing them along the way. Outer hulls were stripped away to form bran, while the interior endosperm was reduced to fine flour meal. The process was slow and gentle, generating minimal heat to preserve the natural flavor and quality of the wheat. Encasing the millstones was an octagonal wooden casing known as the vat or stone tun. This box collected the freshly ground flour meal as it emerged from the outer rim of the stones, keeping it contained and clean. Warm, soft meal flowed out through a small chute at the base of the vat, falling directly into wooden meal chests or canvas sacks placed on the floor below. The aroma of freshly ground warm grain drifted through the room. A fine, velvet-like coating of white flour dust settled gently over every surface inside the grinding room. Beams, floorboards, ropes, and tools were all dusted with a soft white layer, softening edges and catching the golden sunlight. The atmosphere inside was quiet and calm, broken only by the continuous low rumble of the heavy stones. It was a space dedicated entirely to transforming the harvest into basic sustenance for the peaceful world outside. Freshly ground meal contained a mix of fine white flour, coarser semolina particles, and large flakes of brown bran. To separate these components for different baking needs, the meal was passed into a mechanical sifting device known as a bolter. The bolter consisted of an inclined cylindrical wooden frame covered with woven cloth of varying mesh sizes, ranging from coarse horsehair to fine silk. Driven by a belt connected to the main shaft, the bolter rotated gently. As the ground meal tumbled down the interior of the spinning cloth cylinder, fine white flour passed easily through the tight weave of the upper section into a chute below. Coarser middlings fell through wider mesh further down, while the coarse bran flakes traveled all the way to the end of the drum, discharging into a separate bin. This automatic sorting allowed the mill to produce high-grade white flour for castle kitchens and coarse meal for village hearths. The soft rustle of flour sifting through silk cloth was one of the quietest sounds in the entire mill building. The bolting chamber was kept clean and free of drafts to prevent fine flour dust from dispersing into the air. Sealed wooden hoppers caught each grade of sifted grain with gentle efficiency. The resulting refined flour was smooth, dry, and ready for village bakers, representing the final stage of mechanical refinement in the peaceful water-driven process. Once grain was harvested and threshed, preserving it across long winter months required specialized storage buildings known as granaries. In medieval estates and monastic complexes, granaries were constructed with great care to safeguard the precious food supply from moisture, mold, and pests. Often built elevated above the ground on mushroom-shaped stone pedestals called staddle stones. These timber buildings kept stored grain completely dry and isolated from groundwater and rodents. The interior of a medieval granary was divided into deep wooden bins, known as garners, constructed from thick pine planks. Different crops, such as wheat, rye, barley, and oats, were kept carefully separated within their designated bins. High ceilings and louvered wall vents allowed fresh air to circulate continuously across the tops of the grain mounds. This gentle ventilation removed excess humidity, preventing the stored grain from heating up or spoiling during damp autumn weather. Walking inside a timber granary brought a deep sense of peace and security. The air was filled with the sweet, wholesome scent of dried grain, straw, and aged oak beams. Sunlight filtered through small wooden slats, illuminating dust motes hovering silently above the golden mounds of wheat. Here lay the community's reserve against lean winter months, held safely in wooden vaults until it was transported down to the river mill to be ground into flour. Directly adjacent to the watermill stood the miller's cottage, a simple structure built of local stone, cob, and thatched straw. Positioned close enough to hear the water wheel turning night and day, the cottage was the heart of family life along the riverbank. A small stone chimney sent a thin plume of wood smoke into the sky, while a modest kitchen garden stretched down toward the water's edge, filled with herbs, cabbages, and berry bushes. Life for the Millers family followed the steady rhythms of the river and seasonal harvests. During peak milling months after the late summer harvest, the mill ran almost constantly, stopping only when water levels fell or during frozen winter spells. Inside the warm cottage kitchen, simple meals of fresh bread, hearth cheese, and vegetable pottage were prepared. The continuous sound of trickling water outside was a constant, comforting presence during quiet family evenings around the hearth. As night fell over the river valley, lights flickered out in the cottage windows, leaving the mill structure silhouetted against the dark starlit sky. The gentle rushing of water through the bypass channel provided a continuous lullaby for the sleeping household. Connected intimately to the land and river, the miller's cottage embodied a quiet, self-sufficient lifestyle that remained unchanged across centuries of medieval countryside history. In medieval feudal society, the right to construct and operate a watermill was a lucrative privilege reserved for the manorial lord or local monastery. Under the system known as suit of mill, local peasants were legally obligated to bring all their harvested grain to the lord's mill to be ground. Hand querns inside peasant homes were often banned or destroyed, ensuring that all processing went through the centralized, efficient water-powered facility. In exchange for grinding the village grain, the miller retained a portion of the flour as payment, a fee known as the multure. Typically fixed at 1/16 or 1/24 of the total weight, this grain was stored in the lord's granary or kept as part of the miller's wages. Though disputes over multure rates occasionally arose, the system ensured that expensive mill structures were maintained, repaired, and kept in good order for the common good. This legal setup turned the village mill into a central gathering place for rural life. While waiting for their grain to be ground, farmers exchanged news, discussed weather prospects for upcoming crops, and observed the steady work of the water wheel. The mill stood not only as an industrial workhouse, but as a vital community hub where the social threads of the medieval village were tightly woven together in a quiet, predictable pattern. In the year 1086, King William the Conqueror commissioned a grand survey of England, recorded in the famous Domesday Book. Among the vast records of landholdings, livestock, and forests, royal clerks meticulously documented every working watermill across the kingdom. To the surprise of modern historians, the survey recorded over 6,000 active watermills in England alone, demonstrating how thoroughly water power had integrated into 11th century rural infrastructure. The Domesday entry for each manor listed the mill's economic value, often measured in annual yield of silver pennies, grain volume, or even catches of river eels taken from the mill pond. Small hamlets possessed modest single-stone mills, while wealthy monastic houses managed extensive complexes with multiple wheels operating side by side. The survey revealed that virtually every stream capable of turning a wheel had been carefully modified for agricultural use. This detailed historic record paints a serene portrait of an early medieval landscape powered entirely by renewable natural energy. Thousands of small wooden wheels turned in unison along quiet English streams, grinding grain day after day without burning fuel or disrupting the environment. The Domesday Book stands as a quiet testament to a time when technology scaled up harmoniously across green valleys, working with nature's endless flow. Along coastal estuaries, where rivers met the sea, medieval builders developed innovative tidal mills that relied on the ocean's breath. Unlike inland river mills that depended on continuous stream flow, tidal mills harnessed the rising and falling tides of the Atlantic and North Sea. As the high tide rose, ocean water flowed through a one-way flap gate into a large impoundment pond built along the shoreline, filling it to capacity. When the tide began to recede, the incoming flap gate closed automatically under the pressure of the sea, trapping millions of gallons of water in the mill pond. Once the ocean tide dropped sufficiently below the pond level, the miller opened the outlet gates. The impounded water flowed out through the mill race, turning the massive water wheel for several hours during the outgoing tide, twice every single day regardless of weather conditions. Working a tidal mill meant following the astronomical cycle of the moon rather than the solar daytime hours. Milling shifts shifted roughly 50 minutes later each day as the tides changed. Millers often worked under moonlight, grinding grain, while sea fog drifted silently across coastal salt marshes. The gentle sloshing of salt water, mixed with the deep groaning of the wooden machinery, created a uniquely peaceful maritime atmosphere along the coast. In flat, dry plains where rivers were slow or scarce, medieval engineers looked upward to the sky, inventing the post mill during the 12th century. Unlike watermills anchored to stone stream banks, the post mill was an entirely wooden building, suspended upon a single massive vertical tree trunk called the post. This ingenious design allowed the entire building, containing all millstones, gearing, and hoppers, to be rotated manually to face shifting winds. Extending from the rear of the post mill was a long timber tilple that touched the ground. When the wind direction shifted across the open fields, the miller pushed against this heavy beam, walking in a slow circle to swivel the entire multi-ton structure into the breeze. Once aligned, the wooden frame was locked into place with wooden stakes driven into the soil. It was a remarkable feat of balance and timber engineering. Post mills perched high on windswept hills, their 4 canvas-covered sails turning slowly against wide horizons. The wooden body of the mill creaked and groaned softly as it adjusted to gusting breezes, creating a unique soundscape far above the valley floor. Standing beneath a post mill on a quiet afternoon offered sweeping views of surrounding fields, where golden grain swayed in unison with the very winds driving the heavy grinding stones inside. As architectural techniques advanced, builders introduced the tower mill, a permanent stone structure that improved upon earlier wooden post mills. Built of solid brick or ashlar stone, tower mills featured a fixed, multi-story masonry cylinder that remained static in all weather conditions. Only the light wooden cap at the very top of the tower, which held the wind shaft and giant sails, was designed to rotate into incoming winds. Because the main stone tower did not move, it could be built much larger and taller than wooden mills, housing multiple pairs of millstones across separate floors. A small wind vane, or fantail, was eventually added to the back of the cap, automatically turning the sails into the wind without human effort. Inside the thick stone walls, multi-story storage rooms held large quantities of harvested grain, keeping the meal cool, dry, and secure. Tower mills became magnificent landmarks across the landscapes of Western Europe, standing like quiet guardians above agricultural villages. Their sturdy masonry walls absorbed the vibrations of heavy machinery easily, providing a quiet and stable working environment inside. Looking up at a tower mill against a soft evening sky brought a sense of permanent, quiet strength. They stood firm against storms, turning free breezes into daily sustenance for generations. The power of a windmill relied entirely on its sails, large wooden lattice frames fitted with heavy flax canvas cloth. Millers adjusted the amount of sail area exposed to the breeze by climbing onto the frame and unfurling or rolling up the canvas by hand. On light breeze days, sails were fully spread to capture every breath of air. During stronger winds, canvas was reefed back to prevent the mechanism from turning too fast. The wooden sail frames were constructed with a subtle twist along their length, known as aerodynamic weather angle. This clever twist ensured that wind pressure was distributed evenly along the entire arm, creating smooth rotational torque rather than violent jerks. As the four massive sails rotated through the air, they created a soft, rhythmic swooshing sound. The shadow of the turning sails swept across surrounding grass fields in a hypnotic, recurring pattern. Sail canvas was made from tightly woven linen or hemp fibers treated with natural oils to resist rain and decay. Maintenance of these sails was a quiet craft, requiring stitching, patching, and balancing during calm morning hours. Watching four white canvas sails turning gracefully against a clear blue backdrop offered one of the most serene sights in early rural history, a pure union between human fabric and the invisible currents of the atmosphere. Watermills were not used exclusively for grinding grain. By the late Middle Ages, they were adapted for textile processing. After woven wool cloth was washed and fulled, it had to be stretched and dried flat to prevent shrinking out of shape. Mill owners established tenter grounds, large open fields adjacent to the watermill, covered with long wooden frameworks fitted with sharp iron hooks known as tenterhooks. Workers carefully hooked the edges of wet woolen bolts onto the parallel wooden rails, stretching the fabric evenly under uniform tension. Long rows of vibrant dyed cloth, dyed with madder red, woad blue, or weld yellow, hung in parallel lines across green meadows. Fresh breezes and warm sunshine dried the fabric naturally over several hours, settling the weave into consistent lengths and widths ready for tailors. The tenter ground was a peaceful, quiet place where bright textiles transformed green landscapes into open-air galleries. Birds flew softly above the drying fabrics, and the sound of the nearby river mill drifted across the meadow. Walking among long rows of drying wool offered a quiet glimpse into early manufacturing, where natural water, open air, and sun combined to finish essential goods for medieval life. The adaptation of water wheels to drive fulling mills revolutionized the medieval textile industry. Fulling was the essential process of cleansing and matted raw wool cloth to create dense, warm, water-resistant fabric. Instead of turning millstones, the horizontal main shaft of a fulling mill was fitted with raised wooden cams. As the shaft rotated, these cams lifted heavy wooden hammers, allowing them to drop repeatedly into large stone troughs filled with wet cloth. The stone troughs contained warm water mixed with fuller's earth, a natural absorbent clay that pulled natural oils and dirt out of raw wool fibers. The steady thumping of the heavy wooden trip hammers pounded the woven threads together, causing individual fibers to lock tightly into a solid, felted surface. This mechanized process replaced hours of manual foot treading, allowing single mills to process vast quantities of high-quality woolen cloth. Fulling mills were typically constructed along small, clean mountain streams where soft water was abundant. The heavy, rhythmic thrumming of wooden hammers echoing through quiet wooded valleys was a reassuring sign of rural industry. Inside, the damp rooms smelled of clean clay, fresh water, and pure wool. The transformed cloth emerged thick, soft, and durable, ready to shield medieval townspeople from cold winter winds. During the 14th century, water power was applied to another revolutionary craft: the manufacturing of rag paper. In paper mills, water wheels powered heavy trip hammers fitted with iron teeth to pound damp linen and cotton rags into a fine, fibrous pulp. The rags were soaked in wooden vats of clean water for several days, while the wooden stampers beat them continuously into smooth, milky liquid pulp. Craftsmen known as vatmen dipped fine wire screens into the pulp vats, lifting out thin, uniform layers of wet fibers. Water drained through the mesh, leaving a delicate sheet of wet paper on the screen's surface. These sheets were carefully pressed between layers of woolen felt using heavy wooden screw presses, squeezing out remaining moisture before the fresh pages were hung on long cords in spacious drying lofts. Drying lofts in paper mills were airy spaces with louvered timber walls that allowed warm summer winds to pass through. Row upon row of white paper sheets swayed gently in the breeze, turning crisp and smooth as they dried. The process was quiet, methodical, and deeply rewarding. These water-made pages would later carry illuminated texts, legal records, and early printed books, preserving human thought for centuries to come. In iron-producing regions near forested hills, water wheels were harnessed to drive massive forging hammers in hammer mills. These industrial sites used water power to operate heavy tilt hammers weighing up to several hundred pounds, as well as bellows that pumped fresh air into charcoal furnaces. This mechanical assistance allowed blacksmiths to forge large iron bars, anchors, and agricultural tools with unprecedented speed and consistency. The cam tree on the main water axle engaged the end of the heavy hammer handle, depressing it until it slipped off the cam and dropped the iron head onto the anvil. Concurrently, smaller water wheels drove giant leather bellows that maintained intense heat inside the stone hearths. The rhythmic combination of puffing air and rhythmic iron impacts echoed off surrounding valley slopes, signaling the transformation of raw ore into refined metal. Despite the heavy materials processed, hammer mills maintained a disciplined mechanical harmony. Sparks flew in warm, bright arcs across the shaded interior of the forge room, lighting up dark stone walls and oak ceiling joists. Outside, the cooling water ran off the water wheel into tranquil tail races where trout swam in clear currents. It was a place where iron strength met the gentle, untiring energy of natural flowing water. Another ingenious application of medieval hydraulic power was the water-powered sawmill. Introduced to process heavy tree trunks into usable construction lumber. By connecting a crank mechanism to the water wheel shaft, the rotary motion of the wheel was converted into a continuous up and down sawing movement. A long iron saw blade, mounted in a wooden frame, cut smoothly through massive logs supported on automated wooden carriages. As the saw blade moved rhythmically up and down, a ratcheted gear automatically advanced the log carriage forward by a fraction of an inch with every stroke. This ensured an even, straight cut along the entire length of 30-foot timber beams. The labor of square-sawing oak and pine trunks, which previously required hours of exhausting manual hand sawing in pit stands, was performed smoothly by the gentle power of the stream. The interior of a medieval sawmill was filled with the fresh, resinous scent of green pine and cut oak. Coarse sawdust accumulated in golden mounds beneath the blade carriage, creating a soft floor cover. The rhythmic sound of the saw blade, combined with the steady splashing of the water wheel outside, created a peaceful, productive environment. These sawmills provided the timber needed to frame cathedral roofs, granaries, and town halls across growing landscapes. To support the network of watermills and transport processed flour to growing towns, medieval communities constructed simple lockless canals and water bypasses. These shallow waterways connected smaller streams to navigable rivers, allowing wooden cargo barges to slip smoothly through agricultural regions. Lined with sturdy willow trees whose roots stabilized the earthen banks, canals created quiet, reflective corridors across the peaceful green countryside. Barges loaded with sacks of flour, cut lumber, and wool bolts were towed by sturdy draft horses walking along muddy towpaths beside the water. The movement was silent and deliberate, with barges gliding effortlessly over calm water without waves. Small wooden footbridges arched gracefully over the canals, allowing local farmers and livestock to cross safely from pasture to pasture without disrupting water traffic along the quiet canal lanes. The canal networks transformed rural landscapes into interconnected, sustainable ecosystems. Water from high mountain streams fed lower mill races, then flowed into calm canals before returning to natural rivers. Dragonflies hovered over water plants, and swans nested along quiet reed beds bordering the artificial banks. The gentle balance between human engineering and natural waterways created a serene landscape that sustained European rural life for centuries. Operating a medieval watermill required regular care to ensure all mechanical components functioned smoothly and safely. Millers set aside dedicated maintenance days, typically during periods of low summer water flow or after heavy harvest seasons. During these maintenance periods, the sluice gates were completely closed, bringing all internal machinery to a total rest so that inspections, repairs, and cleanings could be conducted safely. Millwrights inspected wooden gear teeth for signs of wear, replacing chipped cogs with newly carved wooden pegs stored in reserve. Heavy axle gudgeons were scraped clean of old grease and relubricated with fresh mutton fat or beeswax. Outside, carpenters replaced worn paddles on the water wheel and cleared algae from the stone flume walls. Every component received meticulous attention, ensuring that the mechanism remained silent, balanced, and friction-free. Maintenance days brought a reflective quiet to the mill building. Without the usual noise of grinding stones or splashing water, the internal spaces felt tranquil and still. Soft, sunlight-illuminated dust resting peacefully on wooden rafters and stone floors. Taking time to care for these timber and iron mechanisms ensured that when the gates opened again, the mill would return to its timeless, rhythmic dance with the river. Life around the watermill changed dramatically with the progression of seasons across the European year. In deep winter, cold temperatures turned stream edges into sparkling ice crystals, slowing the flow of water along the mill race. Millers carefully chipped away ice buildup from the wooden wheel paddles to prevent heavy ice weights from unbalancing the axle. Snow settled softly on thatched roofs and timber flumes, wrapping the site in quiet winter silence. When spring arrived, melting mountain snows and torrential rains filled the riverbanks with rushing water. Sluice gates were fully open to allow high floodwaters to bypass the wheel safely through bypass channels. The countryside awakened with green shoots along stream banks, and the water wheel turned with renewed vigor against the powerful spring current. The miller watched the river levels closely, managing the water flow to keep the mill functioning safely. By late summer, fields turned golden with ripe grain, signaling the start of the busiest milling season of the year. The cycle of winter cold, spring floods, summer growth, and autumn harvest gave rural life a reassuring structure. Through every seasonal transformation, the stone mill stood firm beside the changing waters, an enduring symbol of stability, nourishment, and quiet resilience through the passing years. As centuries passed and steam and electric power emerged in later eras, many ancient watermills gradually fell quiet along European streams. Yet, their architectural legacy remained deeply etched into the rural landscape. Many old stone mill structures were preserved, their heavy oak beams and weathered stonework standing as timeless monuments to pre-industrial craftsmanship. Moss covered their quiet stone footings, and ivy climbed gently across old masonry walls. The engineering principles developed inside medieval watermills laid the foundations for modern mechanics. Concepts of gear ratios, rotational balance, flow control, and automated material handling were all refined by generations of humble village millwrights. These early builders proved that technology could operate in total harmony with natural forces, using clean kinetic power without exhausting fuel supplies or polluting surrounding ecosystems. Today, visiting a preserved historical mill site offers a serene escape into a slower, more quiet age. The gentle sound of running water over a wooden wheel continues to calm the human spirit, offering a peaceful connection to simple physical realities. Standing beside an old watermill, one feels a deep sense of stillness, listening to the soft echoes of a history that moved to the steady, untiring cadence of the river. We end our quiet historical journey where we began, along the tranquil banks of silent rivers that continue their timeless journey to the sea. The heavy wooden wheels may rest, and the quartz stones may sleep upon their timber footings, but the memory of their gentle work remains alive in the quiet countryside. Water continues to flow steadily past old mossy masonry walls, carrying stories of medieval craftsmen and peaceful village life. The repetitive, peaceful rhythms of water wheels, damsel feeders, and turning axles reflect a world that moved without hurry or stress. In this historic space, every movement had a purpose, every sound was soft and natural, and every season brought its own calm work. The ancient relationship between flowing water and human care created a balanced way of living that echoes across centuries of rural memory. Now, as night settles completely over the land, allow the steady, unhurried flow of these historical thoughts to bring stillness to your mind. Like the quiet mill race carrying clear water through green meadows, let your consciousness drift smoothly into rest. The river flows onward in peace, the heavy millstones lie quiet, and the countryside slumbers under a canopy of warm, distant stars. As our journey through the history of quiet mills and silent granaries comes to a gentle close, allow your mind to rest in this tranquil stillness. The rivers continue their soft, eternal flow, and the heavy stones lie peacefully under the starlight. There are no more thoughts to follow and no more stories to hear tonight. Simply let yourself drift slowly into a deep, restful sleep, cradled by the quiet rhythms of the past. Good night, and rest peacefully.